I'm Connor Ruebusch, and if you are interested in the finer points of face punching, you've come to the right place. This is Heavy Hands. Hello and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Connor Ruebusch. Joining me is my co-host, Patrick Wyman. Robot mode has been engaged. Today on Heavy Hands, we are once again finding ourselves smack in the middle of an interim between gluts of UFC action. There's all kinds of good fights going on that are not UFC cards, I'm sure, but most of what we try to do on this show as far as MMA is concerned and boxing is cover the biggest fights, the ones that interest us the most, the one that have the most not only technical appeal but narrative draw as well. And so when trying to come up with ideas for what to do between all these fights, Pat, we kind of hit on the idea of continuing, in a way, one of our most popular series on this show. For our new listeners who maybe haven't listened to the older episodes, they're all labeled with the title of the series, and indeed that series title is Styles Make Fights. As I'm sure all of you listening know, styles do make fights. And in that series, in the past, we've talked about the styles as we see them. We kind of draw fighters into 5 overarching styles. In boxing, traditionally, fighters are grouped into 3 styles, and I'm sure you could nitpick and subdivide fighters any number of ways. But I'm still very interested, Pat, in the idea of what a fighter's style means for each specific matchup. I'm quite intrigued by the idea of the boxing trinity or the boxing trifecta, where you have boxer, swarmer, slugger, and the boxer beats the slugger, and the slugger beats the swarmer, and the swarmer beats the boxer. And A, is that true in any kind of predictive way? And B, if we expand those styles, or even if we didn't, does it carry over into MMA? And again, I don't think we fully tapped the potential of what these style archetypes could mean for MMA, because there are so many. We're striking guys first and foremost. People know that by listening to the show. I think neither you or I is shy about admitting that, right? Given the choice, Pat, if there's a jiu-jitsu tournament on TV or a random like Friday Night Fights, a boxing event, which are you going to watch?
Pretty obviously the boxing.
Right.
That's competitive grappling, not doing a whole lot for me.
Right, and I appreciate its important MMA, and given the choice, I almost always pick MMA. I appreciate the complexity of MMA, though I do have a love for boxing, and I often look at MMA through a boxing lens. MMA is my go-to, but it's the striking that has always fascinated me the most. And so our archetypes come from boxing, and they necessarily describe pretty much striking styles. And so maybe through today's discussion, we can also hit upon the different ways that those styles are expressed in different phases of MMA. What does a boxer puncher look like on the ground versus a counterfighter or versus a brawler? So again, for our newer listeners, this is a series that's been requested. People have been requesting another installment of Styles Make Fights for a long time, over and over, and we appreciate that people are so passionate about hearing more of it. But for our newer listeners, we should maybe, before we get into the main bulk of today's episode, in which we're going to be breaking down style matchups over the next 3 or 4 cards, and kind of seeing how well we can predict those matchups and maybe learning something about our style archetypes in the process, we should go over our style archetypes themselves. So why don't you give them the rundown, Pat?
So first and foremost, we have the pressure fighter. Let's take a step back here and talk about our scheme first and foremost. It's about preferred directionality of movement. Do you like moving forward? Do you like moving back? Do you like moving laterally? Like, what is your preferred direction of movement? Where in the cage do you want the fight to take place? So that's the first thing. But then also, it's where do you feel most comfortable? Do you want to be on the outside? Do you want to be on the inside? Do you want to be in the pocket? Do you like to lead? It's about initiative. So do you like to lead the dance? Do you like to be responding to what your opponent's doing? And the combination of these traits as they're put together is what gives you your style. So a pressure fighter, somebody who wants to be pressing forward, who wants their opponents back to the ropes or to the fence, who wants to be proactive, who wants to be the range is less important to that particular style, but wants to be pressing forward, wants his opponent against the cage. That's first. What would you say is next, Connor? Boxer puncher?
Sure. Boxer punchers. I guess actually to understand like boxer puncher, you kind of have to talk about the boxer first. So we've got the boxer / outfighter. That's a fighter that tends to, as the name suggests, stick and move and fight from long range. Tends to be typified by a lot of lateral movement. Often kind of seen as the more technical of the styles, but maybe that's because boxers to me are really about controlling the distance, controlling the engagements, always trying to be on the high ground, always trying to have the advantage, and never being in a 50-50 exchange of any kind. And then we've got the boxer puncher. I'll let you hit that one, Pat.
Yeah, so the boxer puncher we might call the jack of all trades. The boxer puncher can, in bursts, pressure when that's the necessary thing to do. The boxer puncher can stick and move on the outside, can fight like an outfighter for a while. But what defines the boxer puncher is confidence, and especially confidence in exchanges. So they're willing to sit in the pocket and counter because they believe in they may believe in their punch, they may believe in their craft in that particular space, but above all, or their chin, yeah. But above all, they believe in themselves in that particular way, and they're happy to to allow the fight to stretch into even territory, into what would appear to be 50-50 territory, rather than constantly like an outfighter or a pressure fighter looking for an edge.
Yeah. Then we've got counter fighters who tend to be very comfortable in 50-50 territory, and they tend to be skilled enough, poised enough, and patient enough that those exchanges aren't actually as 50-50 as they may seem to an outside observer. These are the fighters who are the polar opposite of the pressure fighters. Rather than trying to come forward, they often allow their opponents to lead, although the really best counter fighters will try to get their opponents to lead in the way that they want them to. There's a subtle element of control there, but really I think they tend to be the most veteran and most experienced, or sometimes the best trained, and often have pretty good pop in their hands, so they can make their counters sting. And then finally, we've got our crazy motherfuckers, Pat. Our brawlers, the ones that are the hardest to fit into any style. These are the jacks of all trades who refuse to stick to one trade at any given time. Brawlers tend to be just typified by their determination to win exchanges or to do damage in every exchange at all costs. And that's what kind of makes them so difficult to fight. And
they're kind of like the bizarro version of the boxer puncher, right?
Yeah.
Where
the boxer puncher without the schooling.
Yeah, but they can be schooled. They can be tricky. It's just that above all, like they take that whole piece about confidence to an extreme.
Yeah.
Like they can pressure, but their pressure tends to look more like chasing. They can counter, but their countering tends to look more like swinging wildly, because they frankly just don't give a shit. Like a boxer puncher in his most extreme form can be a pretty careful kind of fighter and not necessarily the most exciting one to watch. A brawler is always going to be exciting because he's not careful. Like he's defined by his lack of care.
Yeah. Yeah, and to me, really, the defining thing that I take into all these styles is that they are all mental or based on personality or, emotional characteristics, sometimes more than just by technical skill or training. Often fighters fall into their styles, and there are often examples of fighters who haven't been allowed to fall into their styles and have problems for that. Like Phil Davis, for example, probably isn't very comfortable being an outfighter, but it is what he has been trained to do, and you can see that conflict in him. And so for me, it's like two sets of opposites. I have the outfighters who like to be in control, and I have the swarmers who like to press forward and take control rather than preventing it from being taken. And then we have the counterpunchers who are very patient, swarmers, pressure fighters who are often very impatient and eager to get the fight going. And then the brawlers, they're the weird odd one out. They are maybe a bizarre perversion of the boxer puncher, who is the sort of hybrid, I guess, between the swarmer and the outfighter. The old school boxing parlance would maybe call them a slugger. But Slugger really just seems to say you have heavy hands, and there's a lot of different ways that heavy-handed fighters can fight. I brought up the example of Vladimir Klitschko many times. Super powerful puncher, nobody's definition of a slugger because he doesn't have that confidence in his durability and his skill to stand and exchange. He is definitely an outfighter who happens to hit like a massive knockout artist. And so, again, the physical characteristics are often less trustworthy than the mentalities behind them. And, of course, that requires a bit of armchair psychology on our parts. But who are we to not analyze fighters' mindsets?
Yeah, here's an MMA parallel for that kind of thing. Brad Pickett, not a super powerful puncher by any measure, though he's got a couple of knockdowns on his record. Mm-hmm. But Brad Pickett just super confident everywhere, to his detriment. He
fights like a powerful puncher.
Yeah, I mean, like, he believes a little too much in his one-punch nickname, frankly, which I think originally was a joke.
Was ironic, yeah. It was an ironic nickname because he wasn't a knockout artist.
Yeah, but he's like the quintessential boxer puncher because of his comfort getting into range and slugging it out in the pocket.
Right. So what we're going to do with these style archetypes is we are going to, again, as I said before, look at a bunch of matchups that are taking place over the next several weeks, months even. And over time, we can revisit these fights after they've happened and use this as a jumping off point to discuss whether or not our predictions were true and maybe what things we learned about those styles in the process. How useful are the styles as a predictive schema, and you know, I don't know. We're gonna find some things out about MMA styles, and maybe end up changing some of our archetypes in the process. I'll give you the rundown before we jump in of all the fights we'll be talking about. So we have first up on the docket Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Stephens. That one's taking place at UFC 205. Then we've got Beneil Dariush versus Rashid Magomedov. Oh, and I should have had these. I should have had these dog-eared. When is that one taking place? Dear God.
Isn't that on the Mexico City card?
I think you might be right. We'll get to it when we get to him. I'll just run them down real quick. Then we've got Sam Alvey versus Alex Nicholson. Then Rafael Natal versus Tim Boetsch. Then Talis Litis versus Krzysztof Jotko. Then Tomas Almeida versus Albert Morales. And finally, another UFC 205 fight, Yoel Romero versus Chris Weidman. So all of those are pretty unique style matchups from one another. And some of them are in the middle, are a little mushy and a little weird. So we can try to find out how can we fit these fighters into style archetypes. And is it really useful to try to fit them into those archetypes if their styles don't really want to fit? So let's jump in with our featherweight showdown from UFC 205, Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Stephens. Pat, you and I pretty easily agree that this one is a matchup of outfighter versus boxer-puncher.
Exactly, and that's what makes this a valuable one for us to start with, is because both of these guys there's so much tape out there on them. They are pretty much the fighter that they're going to be. Like, we're not going to see a lot of evolution, I would say, from Frankie Edgar and Jeremy Stephens for the rest of their careers. We're talking about guys who have been in the game for, I think, 11 years for Edgar and I think 12 years for Stephens. Mm-hmm. Like, there's not going to be they're not going to show up at UFC 205 as completely different fighters, I don't think. So stylistically, Edgar is an outfighter. Edgar almost never wants to be in the pocket. He either wants to be all the way out, sticking and moving on the outside behind his jab and combination punching, or he wants to be all the way in. Though in his case, the clinch is more or less replaced by his kind of quick shot takedowns, either reactive or playing off the threat of his strikes. Mm-hmm. Whereas Stephens is the quintessential boxer puncher, less concerned with precisely how he's going to go about putting his power on you than the fact that he can do so. So sometimes he'll pressure a little bit, sometimes he'll kind of stick and move behind a jab and some low kicks, but always he's ready to throw that power shot.
Yeah, and I think that was really typified in his fight with Renan Barão. He was basically faced with a boxer, an outfighter, in round one, Renan Barão, and his response to that was not to try and keep this distance fighting style, which he has become pretty good at over the past few years. It's kind of a new thing for him, but he's had a lot of impressive performances fighting from the outside, showing off his improved footwork and timing and his shot selection. But he didn't choose to go outfighter versus outfighter. He turned into a little bit of a swarmer. He was confident enough, he didn't lose heart when he was being outboxed. He was confident enough to come forward and force Renan Barão to kind of lose his own style, one which I think is not one he's wholly comfortable with yet. And so in this matchup of outfighter versus boxer puncher, who do you like and why?
In this case, I like the outfighter simply because I think that he can that in this kind of matchup, it forces the boxer puncher one way or the other to do something that he's not wholly comfortable with, because the outfighter is not going to hand those exchanges to the boxer puncher, right? Like the outfighter is going to do whatever is necessary to avoid ending up with their back to the fence, or to avoid exchanges. And the boxer puncher isn't really crafty enough to pressure the whole time, isn't really comfortable enough to do that, and doesn't have the level of craft necessary to stick and move on the outside with the outfighter.
I agree. Again, I think we can look back at Stevens' fight with Renan Barão. I think the reason Stevens pulled through is because Barão was willing to drop his newly adopted style in the second round of that fight. And even so, Stevens kind of just scraped by with a win. The third round was very close. Quite a few people, I think about a third of MMA media, gave it to Renan Barão. I can certainly see the argument for it, even if Stevens was still landing heavy shots. So against someone who has been plying that style for years and years at the elite level, and Frankie Edgar, it's hard to see Jeremy Stevens convincing Frankie Edgar that what he's doing isn't going to work. That is pretty much the best thing about Frankie Edgar, is that even when he gets hit, he doesn't really change up his whole style. He just adjusts his tactics. His strategy, his essential way of approaching the fight remains the same, and he finds a way to make what he's most comfortable doing work for the given opponent in front of him, rather than abandoning that and trying to find some other way.
Yeah, the only boxer puncher opponent against whom Frankie Edgar has ever really struggled is Jose Aldo.
Yeah.
Everybody else, he's managed to pull it off.
Yeah.
But that's because there was just no way for Edgar in that kind of fight to dictate pace. You can't dictate the pace against Jose Aldo. It's almost impossible to do.
Yeah, you can try, but you're going to need to be more powerful, or, able to take him down. The fact is that Jose Aldo may be nominally a boxer puncher, but his boxing is on par with pretty much anybody else in the UFC. So he's certainly got the technical mastery to stick with the style of his opponent, rather than changing the way Stevens will.
Yeah, Jose Aldo is probably the only boxer puncher out there who is crafty enough to be a boxer, who is aggressive enough to be a pressure fighter, who's deep enough in the pocket to be a counter puncher. Like he's a boxer puncher, not necessarily because that's his temperament, but because he has the depth of skill to be able to do absolutely everything.
He may be MMA's Andre Ward. He may be that elusive all-terrain fighter, in how easily he kind of slips into whatever style suits the fight, and in how easily he uses styles that his opponents would seem to be more experienced with against them. So he may be the all-terrain fighter that we've been seeking for so long, Pat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if the fight with Frankie Edgar didn't prove that, I don't know, or this last one at UFC 200 didn't prove it, I don't know what would.
Absolutely.
So that matchup seems fairly clear, right? We understand what Stevens is, we understand what Edgar is. Who's up next?
Next up, we have a fight, which you're correct, is from the Mexico City card, the Ultimate Fighter Latin America 3 finale. That's Beneil Dariush versus Rashid Magomedov. Lightweights, Magomedov coming off a long layoff, Dariush just having come back from a loss. I think this one's a little iffy for me, but we settled on Beneil Dariush as a boxer puncher versus Rashid Magomedov as a counter fighter. My initial instinct was to class Dariush as an outfighter, because I think that's what he's best at and probably most comfortable doing. But you did point out correctly, Pat, that he doesn't shy away from pressuring or mixing it up when he needs to. He's certainly got guts. And that's kind of what a boxer puncher is somebody who could box but kind of has more balls. And sometimes to their detriment.
Yeah, exactly. Like Dariush, this is a case where Dariush has clearly become a better fighter under the tutelage of Rafael Cordero. But Cordero may not be, as a coach, a guy who necessarily suits Dariush's innate mindset. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like where Cordero wants to train aggressive, come after you, really, really get after it kind of fighters. And I'm not necessarily sure that that's Dariush's wheelhouse. He's a coachable guy, and he's certainly picked those things up, and he's clearly gotten better under Cordero's tutelage. But it's one of those cases where maybe what Cordero is teaching him is to kind of change who he is at a root level. So I think you can call him a boxer puncher simply because it captures the nature of his evolution, if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I think it's a testament, too, to how good of a coach Cordero is, that it hasn't destroyed Dariush to be coached by a guy who traditionally does not work with the style that he seems to be most comfortable with, that Dariush seems to be most comfortable with. In fact, it maybe in a way has kind of broadened his abilities. Although you might say in some of his recent fights, that willingness to get aggressive, that confidence kind of came back to bite him a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Though to be fair, like, why would you, if you're Beneil Dariush, you're not gonna shy away from grappling with Michael Chiesa. That's just
anyone should shy away from grappling with Michael Chiesa. That's the mistake they all make, Pat.
Well, now we know.
The RNC King. I called it before that fight. I didn't pick Chiesa, and I wish I had, but I said Chiesa will very likely end up rear naked choking Beneil Dariush. He's an animal. He's a monster. He's some other thing that Joe Rogan likes to say about fighters.
Yeah, take your pick for a possibly in any other context insulting way of talking about a person.
He is a beast.
Yeah. I mean, he really is, and Eastern Washington, represent the 509.
Sure.
But yeah, okay. Well, so we're talking about a guy who was basically a boxer puncher versus a counter fighter in Rashid Magomedov.
Yeah.
Who do you favor in this kind of matchup, leaving aside the individual skill sets?
Yeah, and by the way, Magomedov sometimes is a bit of an outfighter himself, but it's his patience, I think, that marks him as a counter fighter. He really, really likes to, and that's also been the criticism of him. And I think with the wrong opponent, counter fighters are probably the most boring to watch, and with the right opponent, they're the most spectacular. For me personally, I love watching a counter fighter work against someone who is willing to be countered or unable to stop it. In this particular matchup, I honestly think that Dariush may surprise some people and have some moments by being aggressive, but I would be surprised if he can outskill Magomedov in those exchanges. It seems like the kind of fight where the boxer puncher may have some success in the early going, until Magomedov kind of gets his timing and picks up on his triggers. And so I've got to favor Rashid Magomedov.
Yeah, I'm with that. Unless Dariush completes his transformation into a born and bred pressure fighter in this fight, which would kind of change the terms of the matchup, then I too favor Magomedov for that reason. But unless Dariush can find a way to get him down, which doesn't seem like it's likely to be the case given the quality of Magomedov's takedown defense.
Some good wrestlers have struggled to get that man to the ground. And even then, I think that counter fighters are maybe one of the more reliable styles to take out people who come in with a swarming approach, a pressure fighting approach. The example I always call back is Juan Manuel Marquez versus Juan Diaz. As long as your counter fighter is truly a counter fighter, he is poised and confident and patient and knows that he can find his openings in those exchanges. I think that the pure counter fighter is really probably the most comfortable in those exchanges that seem 50-50. Now, Magomedov may have a little too much outfighter in him because of his boxing background to allow sort of exchanges in the pocket and everything, and obviously Dariush has his wrestling to make that different. And that may be one of the key differences between counter fighters in MMA and in boxing, and why we see so few of them in MMA, especially so few of them at the high level. But given the chance, I think a counter fighter is often happy to have an opponent who keeps coming forward. That can reward, that can pay off if you manage to break the guy's confidence, the counter fighter's confidence, but it can also be a really punishing endeavor to just be chasing after a counter fighter constantly over and over and running into those very well-timed shots as you're trying to get off your own.
Yeah, I think it depends on the pace that the counter fighter is comfortable working at.
Yeah.
And to me, the battle between pressure fighter and counter fighter has to do with durability and the ability to set a pace. So, can the pressure fighter take the shots from the counter fighter, but conversely, can the pressure fighter push a pace that's too fast for the counter puncher to feel comfortable dealing with?
Can he overwhelm his sense of timing, his triggers, and all of that, his defense?
Exactly. Those are the two basic battles. Can he take the punch? Can he push the pace? And generally, unless when you're talking about a swarmer, I think you're talking about something a little different. I think the swarmer is maybe a little tougher matchup for the pure counter puncher than the pressure fighter is.
Would you class a swarmer differently than a pressure fighter?
I would, yeah, because
maybe a subset of pressure fighter.
I'm sorry?
Maybe a subset of pressure fighter?
Yeah, I would say so. They're united by a whole bunch of different things, but then we get into additional dimensions like I think we could actually add an additional dimension that may help us here that has to do with preferred pace. And how, like, are you a consistent kind of rack up points type of fighter, or do you do your damage in bursts?
Sure, yeah. So maybe like Rafael dos Anjos, very much a pressure fighter. He definitely fights at a good pace, but often likes to have you trapped and let you try to escape so he can hit you. And then maybe, who's a good example? Like Nick Diaz is a swarmer. Not necessarily in some of his recent fights, but classically a guy who just comes forward and tries to overwhelm you nonstop from the very beginning. Every opportunity it's maybe the marriage of the pressure fighter and the brawler, the tenacity of the brawler with the come forward approach of the pressure fighter.
Yeah, like I would say that John Lineker has kind of gone from being a brawler to being more of a swarmer.
Sure, I can see that. Yeah.
So does that make sense at all? Because but I think that dimension of burst versus kind of straightforward, like rack up shot after shot after shot after shot. I think that applies to just about every style to some extent.
Sure, yeah. There are. We had the cheese block once upon a time that Phil McKenzie made for us, where we tried to come up with some way of organizing all of the different characteristics that make up these styles. But you definitely have people in every style. There are sort of subsets of every approach. You have high volume outboxers, and then you have very cautious ones, and you have high volume pressure fighters versus more measured ones. You have different paces and different preferences even among the style archetypes. But that's, again, the thing. Part of our discussion here is it has to be about how useful is it to keep subdividing until we have a perfect way of describing every fighter. At a certain point, the archetypes then lose all ability to really mean anything. They have to be broad
because
enough.
We had this discussion when we first brought this up. Like, are you a lumper or are you a splitter? Do you think that if you're a splitter, if you want to keep looking for dimension after dimension after dimension after dimension, you're probably not going to think that the issue of archetypes is helpful for you at all. If you're a lumper, if you want to find the commonalities rather than the differences, then you'll probably think this is a tremendously useful exercise.
Yeah. And I think that lumping, which not a term I think we should adopt, but I think that lumping is probably a more useful exercise in general for trying to find some kind of predictive way, some kind of reliable way of looking at style matchups. Because again, the categories have to be broad enough that they make sense, and that you're going to have some disparity between the styles among those groups. But then, averaged out, if we were to take 100 matchups between each of the different styles, 100 matchups each between, boxer puncher versus swarmer and swarmer versus, whatever, then on average, the predictions, if these do work, would hold true, even if there were some fighters who, for whatever reasons. And that'll be the fun part of looking back at these matchups after they've happened, is maybe trying to look at them and say, were we wrong about what style beats what style? Or was there something unique about this particular stylistic representative that changed the matchup in a way we didn't expect? Or did someone just get caught? Because sometimes that happens. So why don't we take a quick break, Pat? When we come back, we're going to get to the other ones, namely Sam Alvey versus Alex Nicholson, Natal versus Boach, Laitis Yatko, Almeida Morales, and Romero Weidman. Got a lot more fights to talk about, and a lot more to learn about styles and the fights they make. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. And we are back. So let's jump back in, Pat. Sam Alvey versus Alex Nicholson. This one, again, is taking place at the Mexico City card. Yep, that's right, Mexico City card. And middleweight matchup. We have classed this one. This is a pretty easy one, I think. One of the easier ones to find categories for these guys. Very pure representatives of their styles. We've got a counter fighter in Sam Alvey versus a crazy brawler in Alex Nicholson.
Yeah, what'll be interesting to me as we kind of move along with this, though, is very rarely, I think, do brawlers stay brawlers forever. At some point, if they start working with good coaches, those coaches will try and mold some of the brawler out of them
Mm-hmm.
and work them into a style that's going to be more effective and give them more like career longevity,
Yeah.
basically.
We have guys who started as just reckless brawlers, guys who couldn't give a damn about technique, guys like Justin Gaethje, guys like Matt Brown. Matt Brown now calls himself a technical brawler and has kind of evolved into more of a pressure fighter. Justin Gaethje is much the same, though he doesn't always pressure. Those are guys that still have the brawler in them, I think, but they have honed it into something a little more precise. It's more process-driven now than just unleash your fighter in the cage and let him go wild, because that is just not a reliable way to fight. Dangerous, but not reliable.
Yeah, so but assuming that Nicholson still goes into this fight as kind of a straightforward brawler, I would take the counterpuncher all day, because I think the counterpuncher has the patience to wait for the shot, or to wait for the right shot. I think that Alvey in particular has the power to make Nicholson pay when he comes into that. It's still a dangerous matchup simply because of the swarming character of the brawler and the durability that brawlers tend to have. Like, it's still dangerous in that sense. But I think you have to take the guy who has the better craft and the better toolkit for a guy who is literally going to give him exactly what he wants. Like, Nicholson is going to walk right into Alvey's wheelhouse. The brawler is going to walk right into where the counterpuncher wants him to be and is going to let him get hit, let himself get hit. You know, like,
the question is the brawler going to is the brawler going to give the counterfighter what he wants once he's in that range? You know, is he going to let him get his timing? The dangerous thing about a brawler, I think, a brawler is essentially the guy at the arcade who just button mashes in Street Fighter or in Tekken or something like that, and it becomes really frustrating for the experienced player to deal with them because their patterns aren't there. Now, everybody at a certain point has patterns, even if they don't realize them. Nicholson certainly has patterns, but they're not the same patterns you might be able to replicate easily in training. Working on the triggers for that fighter might be really difficult in the training camp. And so I see this one as a little more of an unpredictable matchup, but I like it because Nicholson is absolutely a brawler. For the time being, at the very least, he is a pretty unbridled one. He goes in there throwing spinning back fists and lead rear-handed elbows and overhands and crazy combinations, and he hits you in the middle of weird exchanges, and he takes a hell of a shot, and he doesn't mind taking a shot. And Sam Alvey is absolutely a counterfighter to the core, and it has often been incredibly frustrating to watch him be a counterfighter. He's so stuck in that style that he has lost fights where it really seemed like he maybe could have won if he were comfortable turning up the pace. But he is just always waiting for the perfect shot. His threshold for what kind of counters he will take and what opportunities he will bite on is much, much higher than it is for most fighters. He'll take like only the shots that are 85% likely to land, whereas Nicholson's going to take every shot that has a 20% chance of connecting.
All right, Nicholson is going to take shots that have a 0% chance of connecting because he doesn't know the difference.
Yes, maybe. Yes.
I think that's true of a lot of brawlers, especially early in their careers. Is they do a lot of stuff that is objectively stupid.
Yeah.
And so, but conversely, I think counterpunchers are the kind of fighters who get a lot better as they age because they tend to be in fights where they're not taking a ton of damage.
Yeah.
Simply because of that patience. And if they're well trained, and I don't really know enough about Alvey's training situation to be able to say one way or the other, but if they're well trained, they're going to get better over time. So yeah. Alvey is coming right into what would generally be the prime of the career for a counterpuncher. So maybe he gets better. I don't know. I'm certainly hoping on the basis of Alex Nicholson's dumbass comments in the first place, and also that pesky little domestic violence incident from earlier this year, that Alvey knocks his head off.
And Alvey, by comparison, seems to have a lovely marriage with a lovely woman. So how can you not root for the guy? Although I just see someone saying that they hated him because of his dead-eyed rictus grin. So there are people out there who find Sam Alvey to be unsettling, if not downright unlikable. But it's an interesting matchup. We're both going with counterfighter. To me, it's a brawler fight, so it's always a little crazy. There are few types of fighter. There are no types of fighter who are that difficult to predict. Not even the all-terrain fighters. You can kind of get an idea of what they think is the best way to approach for a fight. Brawler doesn't think about what the best way to approach a fight is. Brawler thinks about, how can I hit this guy, and how can I hit him again, and then maybe a third time after that. So it's a good one. We both like the counterfighter over the brawler, though. We will keep tabs on that finding. Next up, we've got Rafael Natal versus Tim Boetsch. A lot of middleweight matchups on here, Pat. You know I'm tickled by that. This one we both agreed also pretty easily. It was a boxer-puncher versus brawler matchup. Tim Boetsch, maybe that advanced brawler that you were talking about, maybe has fitted more into sort of a counterfighting style, but still definitely exchanges like a brawler, relies on physical dominance and durability like a brawler, things that have maybe not been working out so well for him in recent years. But for a guy like Natal, who has been touched up and hurt, again, the style matchup maybe matters less when you have a brawler in the equation. Less reliable, but almost more dangerous than any other type of fighter.
Yeah, to me, this kind of brawler boxer puncher matchup depends entirely on how disciplined the boxer puncher is willing to be. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah.
The boxer puncher almost invariably has the tools to win the matchup with the brawler.
Which one is he going to be more, basically? There's a sort of conflict in the boxer puncher style, and so is he going to be the boxer or is he going to be the puncher? And I think we both think that if he's going to be the puncher, he's maybe not certain to lose to Boetsch at this point, but the chances of victory for Boetsch go way, way up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I would say provisionally the boxer puncher wins this matchup, just because I tend to assume discipline. I tend to assume that until proven otherwise, that a fighter can stay disciplined, because we've seen Natal in the past stay disciplined in fights that could be really dangerous for him. So that's going to be my baseline assumption here, with the huge caveat that if he gets reckless and if he starts to believe in himself just a little too much, he can get his clock cleaned. Because again, that's also a thing that we've seen from Natal.
Mm-hmm. And from other boxer punchers, I complained pretty heavily about Keith Thurman versus Sean Porter for that reason. We had a guy in Keith Thurman who could be the disciplined fighter and couldn't resist the call of the puncher. You know, he couldn't avoid the kind of fight. You know, there's that conflict in the style, and Boetsch might be able to bring it out of Natal, or he might just rush him at some point and take it out of him. Natal's not such a boxer puncher, not such a puncher that he's going to, take Boetsch out of there the way that Ed Herman did, or the way that Dan Henderson did. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. I tend to like the boxer puncher as well, just because of the boxer aspect. Like you said, I think the boxer tends to beat the brawler. It's really process versus lack of process. Natal is experienced enough, still I think relatively close to, if not in his prime, and Boetsch I think is definitely past that point. So I'm going to take a disciplined version of Rafael Natal, a disciplined boxer puncher to beat the brawler in Tim Boetsch. And next up we have, that one, by the way, was also a UFC 205 fight, so we can keep tabs on these for future reference. Next up we've got Thales Leites versus Krzysztof Jotko, and I have lost track of where this one is. I think this one's from the UFC Bader versus Nogueira 2, also known as UFC Fight Night 100, also known as UFC Fight Night Sao Paulo. So another middleweight fight. Holy shit, Pat, did I do this on purpose, or was it just an accident of fate that brought all of these middleweights to my attention?
It's because you love them. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's also because nobody else wants to talk about middleweights, and we kind of said before we began this discussion, let's pick a lot of matchups that we maybe wouldn't have had a chance to talk about otherwise, that maybe weren't high profile enough, and we can find a way to make them interesting and to touch on them again in the future. And so basically what this says is that not only do I love middleweights, but that neither of us consider them worthy to talk about on most episodes.
I think let's be clear about who we say when we mean neither of us. We really mean me. I don't think that they're worthy of discussion in the normal.
I have a separate series to talk about middleweights for a reason. I don't even think that we should talk about middleweights all the time. We would lose all of our listenership. So I'm kind of with you on that one, but I enjoy this chance to talk about my favorite division. And in this case, this is one of our mushy ones. This one is kind of hard to categorize, specifically for Thales Leites, who has gone through a bit of a technical revolution. He's kind of a renaissance fighter at this point compared to where he was earlier in his career. So I have him written down as 3 question marks for his style type, versus Krzysztof Jotko, who I think we both agree is pretty definitely an outfighter.
Yeah, Yatko really straightforward outfighter. Like is at his most comfortable sticking and moving on the outside. Will kind of likes to set a long distance. Likes to counter you when you try and rush across that distance. Always looking to control the terms of engagement. Like
Yeah.
there is, if you had a checklist of every possible thing that you could have for an outfighter, Yatko would check every one of those boxes.
So why is Lytis so much harder to define?
Because he's so freaking. Because like there's no kind of underlying like plan there. I don't think like there's no real.
There seems to be very little rhyme to what he does.
Yeah, it's which is very strange. I think you could make an argument that he's kind of a brawler, but I don't think that he's. The problem with trying to classify him as a brawler or a boxer puncher, which I think would be the two most natural categories to slot him into, is that I don't think he's especially confident. Like.
Yeah,
I don't think that he's the kind of guy where you tune him up a bit and he's like, okay, let's get right back after it.
Yeah, well, I initially had him slotted as a brawler, and then he got changed to a question mark when we discussed it before the show began. Sometimes I think we run the risk of making the terms of each category too definite. Like maybe our definition of styles should be like that. Whatever American politician's definition of pornography. I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it. And so maybe when we say like, oh, a brawler has to be confident, maybe that's not it. Sometimes I think people are brawlers not by choice, but because they feel uncomfortable and resort to fighting their way out. They kind of have a fight to the death.
The Stefan Struve complex.
Yes, the fight or flight response, and their response is fight, whereas the boxer's response might be flight. And so maybe the brawler is a parallel to the boxer, the outfighter in that regard. Some of the time, really the best brawlers, I think, are ones who are confident. Guys like Justin Gaethje, guys like Matt Brown. But there are certainly, we've seen a lot of guys and gals who brawl because they don't know any other way. Who brawl because they get frustrated or they feel themselves losing, and it's the only way they can think of to change the tide. And so, to me, Thales Lytis is a brawler simply because I don't think he's skilled enough or poised enough from the outside to be a boxer puncher. And I think he definitely resorts to brawling and slugging when he has no other option. And he definitely did not seem discouraged so much by Gegard Mousasi as he did frustrated. I think that the thing with him in that fight is that he didn't know how. He didn't have the technical acumen to deal with Mousasi's jab, just like Jake Ellenberger didn't have the technical acumen to deal with Rory McDonald's jab. It was a very similar dynamic. And so maybe to me, I'm going to go ahead and say he's maybe a brawler. But again, how worthwhile is it to try to fit him into that category if he doesn't really fit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the process of trying on these different categories for size with him is the useful exercise here, not the decision of what slot we put him into.
Yeah.
Like, we have learned, I think, some things about Thales Lytis by asking, is he a boxer puncher? Is he confident? In what directions does he like to move? What kind of terms of engagement does he prefer to fight under? Like, I think we've learned something about Thales Lytis by saying, well, he got frustrated in this particular scenario when a fighter in who fits these profiles would not get frustrated in that scenario.
Yeah.
Or, I think we learned something about him by that. We don't need to put him into a category, but I'll just say that Yatko is probably going to pick him apart from the outside.
Yeah, probably. There's the physicality of Lytis, and maybe is Yatko not defensively sound enough, again, to deal with a brawler, but the outfighter, I think, control, just as it was with Mousasi, who was certainly an outfighter in that matchup with Lytis, I think the control of the outfighter is really the antithesis to the lack of control of the brawler, the fighter who really doesn't necessarily get to decide what he wants to do at any given moment, nor does he feel he can make the opponent decide what to do. He just goes after you. And so if that is, in fact, Lytis's instinct, then I agree with you. I do think Yatko's going to win that fight, but maybe for most of our other ones here, we're looking at these, and in the future we're going to say, okay, this style beat this style. Maybe in this one we can use this as an opportunity to learn what style maybe Thales Lytis fits into for us, and maybe if he's something else entirely, or if it is useless after all, to fit him into a category. So let's take one more break, Pat, and when we come back, we're going to finish up our list here. We've got Tomas Almeida versus Albert Morales, another slightly mushy one, and then Yoel Romero versus Chris Weidman, certainly more clear, although I have my questions about Yoel Romero's headspace. And then at the end of today's show, we're going to answer 2 heavy bag questions from our patrons. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. And welcome back. Another weird one here, Pat, for our continued list of style matchups. This one's a little weird on both fronts for me. We have Tomas Almeida versus Albert Morales. This one's scheduled also for UFC Fight Night Bader versus Nogueira 2. And this is a tough one. For me, I kind of feel that Tomas Almeida is a swarmer. You had reservations about that. I'm also not sure how to class Albert Morales, and maybe it's because he's such a fresh, inexperienced fighter, it's difficult to know where his style is going to actually end up. He's kind of still in his toddling steps as a professional fighter. So to me, he's kind of between a brawler and a swarmer. Maybe he's a brawler on the road to being a swarmer or a pressure fighter like John Lineker is, as you said before. But give me your thoughts on Tomas Almeida and why you maybe think he doesn't fit so neatly into a pressure fighter category.
Well, I think it's because when you look at the arc of Almeida's career, what you see is a lot of diversity. I think that when he is at his most comfortable, and I think we saw this a lot in his early career, he liked to swarm. He would swarm a lot. He would back you up to the fence and really just unleash with barrages of punching combinations and stepping, jumping knees, mix things up between the head and the body. Like his finish of Viniki Izani, one of his last fights before he came into the UFC, I think is quintessential swarming Almeida. But as we've gone along, I think what we've seen from Almeida is a drastically rising amount of confidence in just about everything else he does too. So there are fights where I think he's happy to be kind of an aggressive counterpuncher, like he still wants to be moving forward, but at the end, but if you throw at him, he's perfectly happy to come back at you with 3, 4, 5 punches at a time, all the while pressing forward. I think that at the most basic level, he's a pressure fighter, but I don't think he's the kind of burst performer that would define a swarmer. I think that he's got a lot of diversity in terms of what he can do. And I think as time goes on, it wouldn't surprise me to see him tone down the aggressiveness as a whole and turn into something more like a boxer puncher. Yeah,
I can see that happening. To me, I think maybe what I'm feeling with Almeida is that he is just a smart pressure fighter. Maybe not a swarmer, maybe not that subset as you brought up before, but just a smart pressure fighter who knows when it suits him to pressure and when it doesn't. We talked about Aaron Pryor last week, the late, great Aaron Pryor, and his tendency to change styles strategically to increase his chances of being effective with the swarming, either to recover his gas tank or to give the opponent a different look and confuse them a little bit, maybe to get them confident again so that he could then jump back in and surprise them. That's Almeida to me. I see Almeida not as a fighter who will willingly win a fight with any number of styles, at least not yet, but as a pressure fighter who knows when it doesn't make sense to just be coming forward. I mean, there are times when you've got a guy backed against the fence and he's throwing at you. It doesn't make sense to sit there and block and parry and slip and maintain that distance and refuse to give ground. That was kind of the problem that Rafael dos Anjos ran into with Eddie Alvarez. He didn't want to back up. He didn't want to give Eddie Alvarez space from the cage. He wanted to keep the pressure on at all times. And whether you can say that was really a mistake, it seemed like a logical approach for him. He certainly paid the price for relying on a more static form of defense and got caught. And Almeida, to me, is a fighter who doesn't necessarily do that. That's why I think he's so promising. One of the fights that you brought up as an example of maybe the flexibility of his style was his fight at Legacy 32 with Caio Machado. And to me, it still kind of looks like a pressure fighting performance. I see him coming forward a lot. Sometimes I see Machado had his back to the fence and he starts letting go. But it just makes sense for Almeida at that point to back off and maybe get another look at Machado and find out his best way to resume pressure fighting. So like with Aaron Pryor, I kind of see his other styles as sort of his other approaches as I don't know, holidays from pressure fighting as sort of tactical retreats.
Adjuncts to it.
Adjuncts, right. They're tactical retreats. To me, they support the pressure fighting.
But to me, that's why he's also not a swarmer, is because there are times when he doesn't take advantage of opportunities that are there because he's got a greater plan in mind.
Sure. And that's maybe, coming into this, I had no subset in my mind between swarmer and pressure fighter. They're just kind of synonyms for me. So I would certainly say he's a pressure fighter. If you don't want to call him a swarmer because that means something different to you, then that sounds fine to me. He certainly doesn't have the classic Nick Diaz approach of just always coming forward, always throwing punches. He's more strategic with his pressure fighting, but I do think the end game of all of his fights is still to push his opponent back and sort of have his way with them.
Yeah, I'm with that. But so how do you see that playing out against Morales? What do you think Morales is?
Yeah, Morales is he surprised me in that Alejandro Perez fight. I did not expect. What does he have, like a year and a half of experience? And most people had him winning that fight. He did a lot of damage to Alejandro Perez, who's a much more experienced fighter and kind of a boxer puncher.
Yeah, that was kind of a gift draw for Alejandro Perez, if we're being honest about it.
Yeah, I looked up on MMA decisions. I think 3 MMA media outlets had the fight a draw, and about 10 or 12 had it in favor of Morales. So he was a little lucky there to get 66% of the judges on his side. But I don't quite know that he is confident in any given style just yet. I think he's really used to being able to overwhelm people, and Perez wasn't quite confident enough in his ability to stand his ground to make him pay for that. And so I kind of think he's going to get beaten by Almeida, but I'm really not sure. And it really depends on where Almeida's at. It's very difficult to pick a guy like Morales over Almeida, who was undefeated in 20-something fights up until his most recent loss to a guy who's quickly becoming a top contender. It's very difficult to pick a guy with like 2 years of pro experience over him. But the style matchup is maybe a little dicey. So,
yeah, I could see that. I think that Morales is a guy who is still in search of a style. Very, very rare, I would say, for a guy with 2 years of professional experience, and Morales will still be shy of that when he faces Almeida, to really know who they are as a fighter.
Yeah,
I think. Like if you look at, I think the guys who have that in their wheelhouse at that point are very, very few and far between, and they tend to be the guys who, moving forward, are phenom type of fighters.
Yeah.
So like Georges St. Pierre knew exactly who he was before he ever debuted in the UFC. You know what I mean?
Even,
like
even that changed.
I'm sorry?
Even that changed over time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. But I'm saying like the basic outlines of the ranges that he wanted to fight at, directionality of movement. Like he was never a pressure fighter who turned into kind of an out fighter.
Yeah.
He grew more and less aggressive at points, but like the basic outlines of who he was were more or less set. Yeah. I think Mirsad Bektic is much more technically sound than he was back in early 2014, late 2013, but he is still basically the same fighter. That he was in terms of mindset and approach. Conor McGregor, I think, is basically the same kind of fighter that he was, maybe a little more willing to sit back and counter, but still basically the same dude. But
these are like tactical adjustments, but style often determines strategy, or at least like basic default strategy that a fighter will take, and the strategies have not really changed for any of those guys, the ways they tend to approach their opponents.
Yeah, so I would say like Chris Weidman was always a pressure fighter, to speak the next guy. But for a guy who doesn't train out of like a huge camp, who may end up changing coaches a few times, like I think it's rare for a guy like that to have himself figured out at this point.
Yeah. Well, the thing is that in the classic boxing trinity, the slugger beats the swarmer. And so the person who really doesn't give a shit about getting hit and hits really hard beats the person who constantly comes forward. in the same way that we thought the counter fighter would beat the brawler for constantly walking into his wheelhouse. And so maybe for me, it's the fact that Almeida is not really a swarmer, as you termed it, not a constant, relentless come-forward fighter, but one who really picks his times to burst and overwhelm his opponent. He picks his spots. That may be the saving grace, and the fact that his opponent's so inexperienced. But traditionally, it may in fact be a difficult style matchup for Almeida, and it may just be the other factors surrounding the fight that make it more forgiving for him.
Yeah, this could be like you could definitely look at this matchup and say, "Oh man, this looks bad on paper for Almeida," and you could see exactly how he would walk himself into a big punch from a larger, heavier single shot puncher than him.
Absolutely.
Right? Like you could look at this fight and say this dude Morales is a great athlete. He presents a lot of the same kinds of problems on paper that Cody Garbrandt presented, but I think the depth of skill is the huge difference here. Garbrandt, I still think if you run that Garbrandt fight back, I would still pick Almeida again if they were gonna do it right over again. Even knowing what we know now, I would still pick him in that fight for exactly the reason that I'll pick him over Morales, and it's depth of skill.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder though, man. Maybe Slugger does beat Swarmer, and maybe Almeida's just gonna have trouble with like the really heavy-handed guys at bantamweight, the ones who are willing to stand their ground and just drop a bomb on his chin as he comes in.
It's entirely possible. It wouldn't, but that's the thing about Almeida. I think this idea of Almeida as like a defensively, as a fighter prone to defensive lapses is generally speaking unfair because it takes him a little while. There is an adjustment period, but if he can make it through the adjustment period, he's an exceptional defensive fighter.
He's a smart pressure fighter. He's got to figure you out before everything works according to plan.
Yeah. So I'm not going to if you could break this down by percentage, by round, at the rate at which Almeida gets hit. After the first 3 minutes of the fight, he is an exceptional defensive fighter. The problem is the first 3 minutes of the fight.
Yeah, I just worry that my fondness for Almeida, because I'm a huge fan, may cloud my perception of his matchups. So we'll see. I won't be utterly shocked if Morales ends up walking him into something big. It may, in fact, be a bad style matchup that if Almeida wins, it could be the experience and the skill level that is the saving grace, the intelligence of his approach. So we will see. But both of us like the Swarmer ? Pressure fighter ? Over the Brawler Swarmer. Not quite sure just yet. We're going to stick with, I guess, a brawler puncher in Albert Morales. And then finally, let's talk about Yoel Romero versus Chris Weidman. This one taking place at UFC 205. Another middleweight matchup, but not the kind I usually relish talking about. This is a truly elite matchup between really imposing athletic fighters, title contenders, guys at the top of their form, even if one of them is about 6,000 years old at this point. So Yoel Romero, we settled on a boxer puncher. And we wanted to end with this not just because it was a big name fight, but because we had a clear definition. But I got to be honest, Pat, I don't know what to make of Yoel Romero. I don't know what category to fit him into. He's so weird in the way that he approaches his fights because he kind of has the patience of a counter fighter, but he doesn't counter. He just kind of doesn't throw enough. And he's certainly got the power and the confidence, the bravado of a boxer puncher. But I don't know that he's really enough of a stick and move fighter to qualify for the boxer aspect of that category. And then again, maybe he is a counter fighter because, as you pointed out earlier today, he counters with takedown attempts. He's kind of all over the map for me, but maybe that is what makes him a boxer puncher.
Yeah, that to me is exactly what makes him a boxer puncher, because what ties all of that together is confidence.
Yeah.
Confidence in his punch, his confidence in his speed, confidence in his athleticism. I was talking to Jason High last week about something totally unrelated, and the conversation turned to Yoel Romero. I asked him about the ankle pick, and Jason just looks. He's like, just shook his head. He's like, I have never seen somebody so big and so fast.
Sure. Yeah.
But Romero knows that. That's what makes Romero so special, is his confidence in his ability to do otherworldly, impossible things.
Yes.
But also what ties all of that together is his confidence in his ability to do anything. right?
Yeah.
Like, and that to me is the defining characteristic of the boxer puncher. It's the belief in your ability to pressure when you need to pressure, the belief in your ability to kind of stick and move when you need to stick and move, like he did some semi-productively at points to keep Jacare Souza off of him in his last fight. Like, I gave Romero 2 rounds in that fight because I think he did it effectively enough to beat out a tired Jacare in the second. So I think that he does have some versatility to him. He can pressure, as we saw when he went after Tim Kennedy, as we saw when he just out of nowhere turned up the jets and went after Machida and just blew him out of the water with like one sequence. Like that to me is he's like the wrestler boxer hybrid of a boxer puncher, because it's not always like that the takedowns serve as an adjunct to what would be power punching for a pure striker.
It's like everything is ooh, got a nice car alarm going on outside the window. Hold on 1 second while I close my window. I'll let you. Oh, thank God, Pat. Look at that. It stopped. Professional production we're running here. Professional production. I jerked away to close the window and realized my headphones were attached to the far side of the desk. So kind of did a dog running into the end of his own leash routine there. The thing with Romero is that everything is kind of seated in this foundation of freak athleticism, his physical ability, and his deep experience and skill background in wrestling. Which is why I think when he first came into MMA, he was not even practicing his wrestling. It's like he always felt he had it in his back pocket. He always feels he has his power and his speed and his timing in his back pocket. So he is the processless boxer puncher. He's never worried about where the fight's headed, it seems. Even when he's getting tagged by Tim Kennedy, he's just going to find some way to kind of suave his way through it and come back to find the win almost out of nowhere. A lot of Yoel Romero's wins come out of nowhere. You know, they really shock you.
Yeah, exactly. So how does that kind of smooth confidence play out against a dogged, determined, defined pressure fighter like Chris Weidman?
It is a tough one. Part of me thinks that the boxer puncher has an edge against the pressure fighter in the way that the counter fighter has an edge against a pressure fighter or a brawler who is willing to come forward, because he is there, he's got the power, and boxer puncher maybe fits into, I'll call back to the boxing trinity again, but the slugger beats the swarmer. Very basic terms. Yoel Romero's a slugger and Chris Weidman's a swarmer. But the difference between him and someone who is a slugger, like a brawler, or someone who's really careful with how they select their counters, like a counter fighter, is that his power is in some ways hampered by his confidence, that he can't stick to a game plan sometimes. The counter fighter is going to patiently walk you into traps and set those traps up over the course of the fight. And the brawler is going to keep throwing things at you until something sticks. And with Romero, it's like he's just going to expect that at some point he's going to surprise Chris Weidman. And if it doesn't happen, then I think he's going to lose rounds to the more consistent style of a guy like Weidman. Now, of course, we have to talk about the wrestling matchup here, and how does that change the style matchup as we framed it. Because Weidman is often a guy whose pressure has been enabled by his ability to out-wrestle his opponents, and it is very unlikely that he will out-wrestle Yoel Romero for any extended period of time. He could get a takedown. Romero's been taken down, but he's not going to win the scrambles against a guy like Romero.
Yeah, I could really see an argument for either way here. But this to me is where what I was talking about before with burst offense versus consistency offense would come into play as a dimension, because Weidman is a consistent scoring offense kind of guy. And Romero is very much a burst offense kind of guy. He's like the quintessential burst fighter, even more so than somebody like Jacare, who is also very much a burst fighter, or John Dodson, who's like an insane example of a burst fighter, you know? Even more so, like Romero is the quintessential example of this type. And I think that may be the difference here, that Romero thinks he's going to find his burst, and just never really gets his offense going. You know, like maybe he's slowed down a little bit of a step. He just doesn't quite find the opportunity to land it. Alternatively, I could also see Weidman is not like a defensive genius. I could see Romero landing something big literally at any point in the fight, even in the third round. If it were 5 rounds, I would feel more confident about picking Weidman. To me, this is a coin flip of a fight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a tough one. I'm going to go ahead and say that pressure fighter beats boxer puncher. Because I think that confidence will be a detriment for Romero at some point. I think he's going to give up rounds, and banking on your ability to finish somebody, especially somebody as tough as Chris Weidman, as durable as Chris Weidman, is a tall order. I also kind of feel like with the extensive work he's done with Mark Henry since his loss to Rockhold, we may see a better defensive Chris Weidman than we ever had before. So I'm going to take the measured approach of the pressure fighter, the consistent approach of the pressure fighter, to the ace up a sleeve approach of Yoel Romero, the boxer puncher.
Yeah, I'm with that. I think part of the issue here is like I very clearly love Yoel Romero. I love the wildness, and like it's gonna sound weird to say this a little bit, but I have never been entirely sold on Chris Weidman. Like you can go back and find a Bloody Elbow forum thread or like a thread on a Bloody Elbow article from 2012. Where like after he beat Mark Munoz, where I'm like, yeah, no, I still think Luke Rockhold is the better long-term bet here. So like, I don't know. I've just never been quite as all in on Chris Weidman as a like the very best middleweight out there. Like I think that he is I think that he is beatable in a variety of different ways. I think he's beatable, and I think that Romero could find one of those ways. But that's why this is a coin flip instead of me favoring Romero.
Chris Weidman to me is MMA's Danny Garcia.
I think that's a really, really good parallel.
Without the avoiding of fighters that Danny Garcia is now well known for and reviled for. When Danny Garcia is fighting competitive fights, I've always liked him kind of because he doesn't seem like this incredible, mind-blowing fighter. He's just pretty fundamentally good. And he's tough and determined. He finds a way to win fights. That's kind of Chris Weidman. Me and some of my friends used to joke for years about you would always expect Danny Garcia to lose and then be shocked when he won. You kind of feel that way with Chris Weidman sometimes. Like you're not shocked that he wins some of these fights, but you're kind of like, oh, I didn't know he could do that. I did not expect it to happen that way or that impressively. But I think that's maybe that's why I like Danny Garcia. And desperately hope to see him actually taking meaningful fights again at some point in the future. And that's why I like Chris Weidman. I like that. I don't know. There's a certain kind of ruggedness to that sort of approach, a blue-collarness, if you will.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think they're alike, even down to the sense that they're both just a little bit more athletic than you expect them to be, and they both cover distance just a little bit faster than you expect them to.
Yeah.
I actually think that's a great parallel, where there's like a lot of depth and a lot of craftiness to what they're going to do out there. They're not the best athlete in the division, and when they fight the best, and like if and when they fight the best athlete, you can kind of see that gap.
Yeah.
But their toughness and durability and ability to fight to a game plan, generally speaking, is what tends to get them through it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you approve, Pat. So again, half this exercise of today's episode is trying to find what categories these fighters fit into and if they belong in those categories. But the other half is about seeing how predictive the style matchups can be. So I'm going to run back through our list here and give the names of the fighters and the style matchups and go back over what we've picked for posterity. Frankie Edgar versus Jeremy Stevens. We called that outfighter versus boxer puncher. We both picked the outfighter to beat the boxer puncher. Benil Dariush versus Rashid Magomedov. We called that boxer puncher versus counterfighter. We both picked the counterfighter to beat the boxer puncher. Sam Alvey versus Alex Nicholson. We called that counterfighter versus brawler. We both picked the counterfighter to beat the brawler. Rafael Natal versus Tim Boetsch. We called that boxer puncher versus brawler, and we both picked the boxer puncher to beat the brawler by being a better boxer. Talis Litis versus Krzysztof Jotko. We weren't sure about that. I'm going to put a question mark around the term brawler for Talis Litis just because he's not quite like smoothly well-rounded enough to be a boxer puncher in my book, but that remains a question mark versus Jotko, the clear outfighter. So we'll say we both picked outfighter over maybe brawler. Tomas Almeida versus Albert Morales. I think we do kind of agree. That's pressure fighter probably versus brawler at this point for Morales, and we both picked pressure fighter versus brawler, though I'm a little worried about that one. And then Yoel Romero versus Chris Weidman, boxer puncher versus pressure fighter. We both hesitantly picked the pressure fighter to beat the boxer puncher. Some close calls in there, but I think it'll be fun over the next few weeks and months to look back at these fights and see where our predictions went right and where they went wrong and why, and maybe if it was even valuable to use those metrics as predictions in the first place. So before we close things out, we have a couple of heavy bag questions from our patrons on Patreon. So let's look into those. First question, Pat, comes to us by way of Carl Calmer. He asks, given his limited experience against elite opponents, how far do you think Do Ha Choi can go? What do you say, Pat?
I think he can go pretty high in that division. I think he can reach I'd say he tops out around the top 6 or so. I think that to some extent, his takedown defense is going to be an issue that is never fully resolved. Like, he has never been fantastic at stuffing takedowns. Even now, he does not seem to be fantastic at stuffing takedowns. But he is such an offensively potent fighter that up until he reaches guys who can do some stuff defensively, avoid enough of his shots to be able to work takedowns, grind him against the cage, or even kind of stick and move against him on the feet, up until he reaches that point, I think he's going to just knock fools' blocks off. And I don't think he's going to hit that point in the featherweight division as it's constructed until he gets up to the top.
Yeah, I do have worries not just about his takedown defense, but about his hitability. I don't think he's a very defensively minded fighter. I think he is all about timing you for the big shots and then piling on offense. Not that he's like the easiest guy in the world to hit, but we have seen him hit in the past more frequently than would be ideal, of course, which is pretty much the case anytime you say that about a fighter. And we've also seen him hurt. I guess it's encouraging that he survived the fight with Sam Sicilia, which got kind of crazy at points without ever really being stung. But again, there are fighters who have a deeper set of skills than Sam Sicilia, who are not going to respond to Do Ha Choi's power in the same way, and not get so reckless. So I do have questions, but I think being so young and having so much room for potential and already being so dangerous, I think pretty far. It's a deep division, but and it's one of those Shark Tank divisions where it maybe doesn't have quite the numbers of a division like lightweight or welterweight, but it's like a top 50 with a lot of parity between them. Anybody could beat anybody on any given day. So it's a tough road, but Do Ha Choi, it is a very valuable gift to have the kind of power and the precision that he has. So I think, top right on the edge of the top 5 sounds about right. And who knows, if he gets a lot better, he could go beyond that.
Yeah, I mean, he's right in his prime right now. Like, I think this is one of those fighters where we have to stop thinking like, oh, this is a young prospect. He's not. He's 7 years into his career. He started fighting when he was 18. He is probably he can still make improvements. He's going to make improvements, but he's not going to become I don't think a drastically different fighter in the next 2 or 3 years. Like, the days of him making huge leaps from fight to fight are probably over. Knee jerk, Connor. Do you think he beats Cub Swanson in December?
Ooh, boy, this is a slow knee jerk. God, I don't know. I haven't even thought about that fight yet. I kind of think he does, just because I think Cub is fading, but I'm really not sure about it. And when Cub is on, he can be a really smart defensive outfighter. You know, like the latter half of his fight with Jeremy Stevens or his fight with Ross Pearson. Mm-hmm. When he's in there with somebody who he realizes is dangerous, but kind of limited strategically, he can be a smart fighter. He's got the boxer-puncher dilemma. He has trouble sticking to one style or the other, but when he sticks to the boxer, he's pretty good at it. So he might beat Do Ha Choi. I might pick Cub Swanson there. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think Duho's gonna clock him real good.
Yeah, but it's not Max Holloway we're talking about here, you know, with that depth of skill. It's not quite there. I don't know, man.
No, I mean, I think let me think of how I want to put this here. I think that if we were talking about the 2013 or 2014 version of Cub Swanson, I would take him in this fight simply for exactly the same reasons that you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think the 2016 version of Cub Swanson, a guy who has looked successively slower in each of his last 3 outings, he's looked slower than he did the fight before, against a young, fresh guy who's demonstrably getting better and is pretty dang quick on the trigger, and who is capable of doing something that's always been a problem for Swanson, which is overwhelming him with volume and information. Mm-hmm. I would still probably take the crafty prime Swanson of 2013 or 2014 over Choi, but I think this one, who's just not quite as quick to pull the trigger, I'm taking Doo Ho Choi.
Yeah, you've sold me. 2 minutes later or so, my knee has finished jerking. I'm going to settle on Doo Ho Choi as well. Quite a knee-jerk reaction there, but it's tough, man. If Cub weren't slipping, I might favor his depth of skill, his experience, but more fragile, less quick, and less capable of doing the things that he clearly wants to do. So we'll go with the Korean Superboy there. Final question for the day from Mark Guagenti. Both of these guys, longtime supporters of ours, so thank you both for supporting us, and thank you for waiting patiently while we get to these questions. Mark asks, the overhand versus the rear hook. Sometimes it seems unclear to me when a rear-handed punch is truly an overhand. It can be easy to differentiate with fighters like Chuck Liddell or Joanna Jędrzejczyk, but I run into some conflicting naming from different sources on near-identical punches. How do you personally differentiate them in form and function? For me, Pat, I tend to call a rear hook a wide right. I'm not sure where I got that from, but a rear hook in the way that a left hook is typically thrown is very rarely a viable punch. The angle for it is really only there sometimes in like little clinch exchanges. Typically, we're talking about a long looping right hand and still being thrown kind of across the body. It feels different to me than a hook. But the idea is that it is, I guess, the arc is more on a horizontal plane, whereas the overhand comes down over the top, as the name suggests, kind of an inverse uppercut. Do you think it's a valuable distinction, and how do you differentiate them?
Yeah, okay, so I do think it's a valuable distinction. I also, and this is just for me, because I throw my hooks with my hand like I'm holding a coffee cup, as opposed to the knuckles parallel to the ground. So that to me is the biggest difference. I throw a right hook with my knuckles facing with my knuckles perpendicular to the ground, and I throw an overhand looking to land with those first two knuckles, like a Russian style hook. That's my big differentiator between the two. As much as it is about the angle from which the punch is coming, like I fundamentally throw them with different mechanics. But you're right about the limited utility of a right hook to the head, except in very tight spaces. It's because if you throw that punch without throwing it as an overhand, think about how limited your range is. Like you can barely throw it beyond your lead foot. It's hard to
without
throw
extending
a
it.
tight
You
right
mean?
hook.
Yeah, a tight right hook. Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to throw that punch.
It happens in clinches. You'll see guys like Gene Fulmer throwing it a lot, very right-hand dependent fighter, but you typically after body contact has been made and while kind of creating space. Or like a swarmer like Henry Armstrong pushing off and landing that short right hook over the top of the shoulder. Definitely a hooking punch at times, but again, definitely only in very select circumstances. Whereas to me, like a wide right, a longer curving right hand, a sweeping right hand, some people might call it, and an overhand, more versatile in what they can do. Although personally, an overhand I don't think is as versatile as MMA fighters want it to be.
Well, I think we're seeing a lot less of the
Yes,
overhand now. Even just in the last couple of years, I don't think we're seeing it nearly as much.
it's been the dawn of the straight right in MMA.
Yeah.
But I think that's why, personally for me, I throw a lot more wide rights or hooking right hands than I do overhands. And I think it's because they play really well off of straight right hands. The utility of the overhand, to me, is more about getting the person to make the right angle. Someone leaning back is really ripe for an overhand because you can come down on that jaw. It's not a very good punch, personally, in my experience, to throw against someone who's shelled up. Or someone who's standing right directly in front of you, because you're going to hit the top of their head. And it's not only less likely to hurt them, it's more likely to hurt you. I don't find that to be a very enviable target. A wide right targets the temple, cheek, the eye, the jaw, all the soft, vulnerable targets that you want to hit with your punches. Same targets that are aimed at by a straight right hand. And when somebody tries to parry a straight right, they can often open themselves up to the wide right. Or if they turn to block the overhand, the straight right, they can be hit by the wide right. Floyd Mayweather uses a sort of weird sweeping right. He throws his with a thumb up, coffee cup style. But often I think he did it so that he could hook his opponent's arm with the fingers of his glove and pull their guard out of the way just to kind of mess with them. And he's well known as a guy who needed thick gloves because he didn't close his hands when he punched anyway. So
I'll give you one other example of a way that I like to that I throw the right hook, and that's after a Dutch style like glove sweep. where you reach out, like you're in tight. You're not necessarily in the clinch, but you're kind of in the pocket. You've got them backed up to the fence or in the corner, and you reach up with one hand from like a tight shell guard when you're in that space. Sweep their glove down, and then you throw a tight right hook as you step backwards. Like Nikki Holtzkin is the master of this particular.
You reach across and pull the left arm down with your jabbing hand.
Exactly. Yeah. You come up. It's like you bring your left hand up into almost like you're feinting into a cross-armed guard. Pull the glove, and then you back step right hook to get out of that space, and then you can do whatever you want to do at that point. It's a sneaky little shot, but it's a useful one. Dan Henderson throws right hooks coming out of the clinch, not overhands coming out of the clinch.
Short ones, yeah. The one he threw against Shogun, for example, in their rematch.
Yep.
And another example, one we mentioned earlier, of a wide right, of a hooking right, Eddie Alvarez knocking out RDA.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think it's a more useful punch than an overhand. I don't like overhands. Like, they always hurt my hands and wrists when I throw them. Maybe that means I'm not throwing them right, but
yeah, it's to me, I think it's more limited than the wide right. It's more limited to a very specific position. Like, if you jab somebody and they pull back, or if you have them expecting a body shot and they kind of pull back and crunch to their right to protect their liver, you get that angle. Somebody's trying to slip the jab. You can get that angle to come down with the overhand, but that's not the way it's often used. And the way or a
skilled counterpuncher who's really good at timing your jab.
Sure, yeah. And that's really almost more of a straight right where you're just giving it a bit of a curve so you can get over the shoulder. You know, you're not.
Yeah, I mean, my old Muay Thai coach used to just nail me with that when we sparred.
Yeah. You're still targeting.
I got lazy pulling my jab back, and so he was always ready to time an overhand over it.
Yeah, and you might even just call that a right hook or a wide right over the top. It's targeted over,
but the way that he would throw it, and the way that I think those overhands are best thrown, and this maybe is the great utility of an overhand as a counterpunch, is that you can pull your head offline as you throw it to avoid the next shot. That I think is a big difference between a right hook and an overhand. Is like with the overhand, you tend to be pulling your head offline.
I do it with the wide right too.
Really?
Yeah.
No, I find it hard to do that, but maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I mean, you can do it with a straight right, too. Straight right's also a really reliable counter to a right hand if the other person's head stays there. But a right hook, again, it's a weird motion. Some people say that a right hook feels natural. A right hook has always been this garbage punch for me. It feels really weird to throw, a short right hook. So props to those of you that can do it. But, Mark, we hope that answered your question. I'm sure it more than answered your question because we went on and on there. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to today's episode. Styles Make Fights continues. We keep finding ways to bring this series back, and that's because it's such an interesting discussion to have. I always enjoy touching on these topics, and I'm really looking forward to coming back to the fights that we discussed today periodically as they take place. Maybe we can make those kind of the end plate segments for several future episodes and discuss where we were right and where we were wrong. So keep this one in your memories. Don't be afraid to come back and listen to it again if you need to remind yourself. Before we go, quickly, Pat, what do you have coming out this week?
Not a whole lot, to be honest with you. I'm kind of working on a few other projects that'll be coming out over the course of the next week or so. I'm working on a big feature article on gladiatorial games in ancient Rome and why they went away. That's one thing that I've got going. I'm working on my big piece, my big data-driven piece on fighter origins and where every fighter in the UFC is from. So I'm collecting the data for that. I will have a brand new episode of The Fall of Rome out this week, though. That's coming up. So look forward to that.
Yeah, not much happening for me either, Pat. Although you say not much, and you still have about as much coming out in a week as I typically do. So. Damn you. But basically the same stuff I've been working on. Videos in the hopper. Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev's coming up. I'm determined to have several videos out for that. They're taking a little bit of time, but it is what it is. Video production, Pat, it is not all that it's cracked up to be. So that's mostly
it's hard, man.
It's very hard. Yeah, you get about 5 minutes of video for like 5 hours, 8 hours of editing, depending on how demanding what you're doing is. So, yeah, it's tough. But, that's about it for me. Videos is what I'm really focusing on right now. Anyway, that's enough of that. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us. I don't know about you, Pat, but I really enjoyed this discussion. I don't know.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
It just gets me. I like talking about fighting styles. I like talking about the mental aspects of the game. It's good stuff, and we will follow up as we go forward. Until then, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands.